We'll start with the review of the minutes from our last meeting on October 5th. This is a meeting that I didn't attend, so I will not be voting. Any comments, edits?
I saw nothing. I just read through them. It's exactly how I remember it.
Just shorter.
Yeah.
Do you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I would move that we accept the minutes as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Minutes are accepted. Are there any public comments unrelated to tonight's agenda? No? All right, seeing none, we will move on to administrative matters. We will continue our discussion towards the development of the master plan. Greg, would you like to join us, please? Hi.
Am I supposed to start? I've got a checklist of
You have a
things
checklist.
I thought we should talk about. Do you guys?
Unless anyone has any.
I read through the things. I couldn't print them out, so I did it online. So I might have missed them, but I did notice like 3 things that might be worth
Yeah.
pointing out. One was on page 25. And I'll have to remember what did I was I thinking here?
Oh, you didn't write down what it was, you know?
Yeah, I did, but so on it's on actually page 26. For some reason, I when I read this, I kept reading it. So 6B, ensure that, and maybe this is just me and the way I read it once I got it in my head, but ensure that the land use regulations encourage rather than provide obstacles to dense. So how I was reading that, maybe actually that looks like it's already been changed. Encourage rather than provide. Or because the way I was reading it, that they encourage
Dense development.
obstacles to dense development rather than provide obstacles to dense.
Use a couple comments.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something there that just, it sounded like an either or, and neither one seemed like it's acceptable.
They both encourage and provide seem too similar, rather than, to have a rather than in between.
I mean, it seemed
What's
kind
the
of
intent?
Enact.
You wanna,
Don't put up obstacles to dense development
Right.
in appropriate places.
Encourage dense development rather than create obstacles to dense development.
how about that?
Yeah, it does say encourage dense development,
Right.
Yeah,
not just don't discourage it.
would it be clearer if the rather than was moved after dense development, encourage dense development rather than provide obstacles?
Yes, yeah, that, okay. So that was one thing, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time to bring this up, but it came up at the PCC meeting last night.
Want to knock it off that?
Oh, I'm
So, but, just a little format, throw a return after capacity period, so that,
I was, yeah, I saw that.
Oh, yeah.
If we're just kind of cranking through this in order. Number 10 in the same section. It says ensure that a developable or redevelopable space is zoned to accommodate business growth stimulated by Plymouth State University and the Enterprise Center at Plymouth. Is there any reason why it's only business growth stimulated by Plymouth State and the Enterprise Center, or do we want this to cover any business growth? I guess what I'm
Maybe an
suggesting is
outcome.
just cross out from Plymouth State, or by Plymouth State University on.
It sounds like a pretty specific outcome from the forums,
Okay.
so I think to cross it out makes sense.
And others. I mean, that way it's not just totally restrictive to those two entities.
Yeah, if we want to make sure we're giving a nod to Plymouth State and the Enterprise Center, yeah, and others is fine as well. Did you have more?
I did. This is the one, I don't know if this is the appropriate venue for this, but on page 30, number 14, continue to support the environmentally sensitive zone as it stands today, but not expand it to smaller streams. You know, I think this is a discussion that maybe the planning board needs to have, or maybe we totally want to avoid it. But last night at the PCC meeting, we were talking about Tenny Mountain Highway and how to protect the environmentally sensitive zone. I wasn't part of this. It was before I was on the commission, but it was, everybody on the commission who was there at the time was very discouraged with the word incidental. Brian, you probably remember this.
Yeah, but there's a whole lot more to it than just that word, if you recall.
I don't recall
Okay.
because I wasn't part of that, but they thought striking somehow.
The problem that we had with that, I believe, came from the adoption wholesale of language from another book, be it state or federal, without understanding just what exactly that term meant, which led to 10 years of lawsuits. And the final outcome was that it meant exactly what everybody said it meant. It was supportive to the project, period. So now that it's been clarified, I don't believe that there's any reason to go into there again, but you know, I don't have statutory authority here at all. But I'm just saying that it's a huge worm can. And if you view it in that light, you know, it might alter the way that people are looking at it.
Okay. And I was just, so, and that sounds like something that probably is outside of the master plan. I mean, could that somehow be addressed in the master plan?
Yeah, it's a work item. We don't have to know how we want to address it, but if you want to revisit it or clarify it or anything, this is the place to mention that as an action item.
I think also if we want to make sure we're protecting some of these areas on Tenny Mountain Highway, to do it not under the environmentally sensitive zone might be, in name only, the environmentally sensitive zone. I think this is what you're saying, Brian, tends to be a kind of a hot topic.
Yeah, because it brings in all kinds of factors. I mean, it came into play prior to the Comprehensive Shoreline Protection Act. We actually got a jump on the state on that one. And instead of, if you remember as originally written, the CSPA had a 50-foot no-build zone and a 250-foot area of consideration. So they said 75 feet no build, 500-foot area of consideration. It was drawn not on flood levels, but purely by proximity to the river. So in some cases, it actually extends over Tenny Mountain Highway to lands that are not even in the flood zone, nor are they particularly wonderful, to keep. I don't know that they would have any. All land has value, and obviously you get closer to the rivers, it becomes more valuable because it's a lot more fragile. But the dike that is formed by Tenny Mountain Highway in the area where it crosses effectively seals that side of the river, from the other side. I mean, it's a huge concrete border between the two, and then when you cross the highway, suddenly it starts going uphill. There's no real features there that you're crying out to be protected, like some of the wetlands and the higher lands, and things like that, the conservation areas around. But it was without getting too much into it, from where I sit, it's it's a touchy subject in the town because it has a direct impact on Tenny Mountain Highway, which is the commercial corridor in the town of Plymouth. We have a retail corridor here with our wonderful downtown. You know, it's become a walkable thing. There's more street cafes. There's a lot of action downtown lately. But the idea of Tenny Mountain Highway would be open more to development for entities that are locating out there, like the hotel or the grocery stores or the larger footprint buildings. You know, and then it only got more interesting when the environmentally sensitive zone was put in place, because that really affected how people could develop those properties that were proximate to the river. You know, we have a big chapter on floodplain development in the zoning ordinance. This all kind of came around at the same time. So that, you know, it was a reaction to a proposed development. Not, I think that was the impetus more than, you know, that was really the way to go about it, if you know what I'm saying. You know, it was an early adoption that's since been shown to be kind of weird, and a little bit of taking on the part of the town and the community, and a little bit of glossing over certain other areas, and huge amounts of confusion as to what things actually mean. You know, and a lot of the citizenry were upset that we had to be told what it meant by the Supreme Court, but there were also an equal, if not more, amount of the citizenry who knew exactly what they meant when they used the terms that they did. And basically it was a grammar lesson for everybody, because it's not incidental. It's incidental to legal construction. It's a phrase. And that really, you know, because the argument against a lot of the stuff was that it was a quantitative number. Well, there's no numbers in that portion of the ordinance, so it can't be that. And it had to be about, you know, what's legal. I mean, an argument was made that, you know, if you're not building on the site of the excavation, then it's not incidental to the construction. Well, no. If you're digging an impoundment or a mitigation pond, that is incidental to the legal construction of that property, because otherwise it would void the floodplain development standards that we'd set in the zoning ordinance. So it's pretty complicated, you know. I think it's been clarified enough now, but again, I gotta kind of pull myself back. This isn't my decision. It's entirely up to you folks. I can provide a bit of history because I've been here for that long and involved, you know, in the town government for 10 years. But prior to that, I was a citizen that sat on the zoning board. So, you know, I've watched it all the way through, and you know, a lot of things became clear after the fact as to just why and what and how these things were developed.
Can we just, for tonight and for this, just say review and update as necessary, so that we don't have to talk about the pros and cons of revisiting it, but it's an option if the planning board so chooses or the Conservation Commission wants?
It sounds like the people, you know, I don't know enough about it yet, and I'd like to look at, because that comes out of the zoning regulations,
Correct.
right? So that phrase, and they didn't think of it as a phrase. They thought of it as the word incidental.
And that's the problem.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think it would be worth revisiting that to decide, is it even worth opening this can of worms, and is it, and the implications of it, because I feel a little bit in the dark. I'd like to know a little bit more about it. I'd like to look at the zoning regulations.
So I think number 14 in particular is something that came right out of the surveys.
Right.
So for that reason, I hesitate to change too much of that, because it's sort of, this is what residents specifically said. But to address the Conservation Commission's concern, less about the environmentally sensitive zone, but more about the purpose of what they want to see happen on Tenny Mountain, is there something that we can put in the land use section or in the natural heritage section that addresses their concerns and what they would like to see happen there?
Maybe so I think the next step was going to be to distribute these to the various entities, commissions and whatnot. Maybe at that point, I could put that question, your question, which is a good one, to the commission, and put it that way, so it's not just striking a word, it's actually putting something constructive in there, like an action.
Yeah, but the most general input that we've had, as Rebecca pointed out, was the survey, and that came wholly out of there, correct? I mean, the wording exactly as it is.
I mean, it was Tara's interpretation of the survey results
Okay.
when I believe it mentioned something about the environmentally sensitive zone, what to do about that, how to protect streams, I think.
I can't believe that the second part, I can't believe it came out exactly as written, and
Right.
I would just disagree that we don't have to be completely beholden to the survey. If
Okay.
we think that if we can simplify this and still have it as an action item. And I would at least strike the second part, but not expand to smaller streams, and actually change 15 to be consider an overlay zone to protect wetlands and riparian buffers, like separate it.
I like both of those because I think it's still acknowledging the survey and what input we
Right.
got without just taking things off the table, so.
Although, yeah, and when you say continue to support the environmentally zone as it stands today, that is with that phrase that may be causing problems. I mean, is
Right.
there, so is that something that we want to revisit, that we should look at? Because the Conservation Commission's take on that, and once again, I don't have a position on this. I don't have enough background information yet. But they seem to think that that phrase or that word handcuffed them, so really they couldn't do any. I mean, there was nothing you could do down there. If someone wanted to develop, there were no constraints or
They went I believe they went as far as they could without an outright taking on that. You know, if it's viewed along with the zoning ordinance, you know, in the floodplain development, basically it was just an extra caution, you know, the overlay zone, and, you know, how would they define it, and, you know, describe the acts that would be in there, because, you know, you don't want to have your tire pit down there or things like that, or you don't want to alter the terrain so much that it would create other issues along the river, you know, because it, you know, no mitigation up here equals flooding in Ashland, you know, so you looking at it as a system. I mean, you know, the way I read that is almost in the negative. It's like, leave it alone. You know, continue to support it as it stands today, and don't expand it to smaller streams. Well, those are third and fourth order rivers out there. So I imagine that probably some of the idea would be that, you know, the creek, I live along Tannery Brook, you know, and I can't envision that I would ever, you know, need to do anything in there. But for example, I had to take down some trees to get some sun in my property. If those were higher order streams, I wouldn't have been able to do that.
There could be exceptions. It's
No,
on
I
how the
understand that,
riparian
but
buffer
I
is
mean,
written.
suddenly it becomes
Right.
onerous to do this where it was, you know, a matter of right before. And I'm not talking clear cutting either. You know, I'm talking, you know, shade trees or trees that are endangering within 100 feet of a property, that kind of stuff. And I know there are mechanisms the other way around, but, you know, at this point, you're adding to the burden instead of helping or even, you know, holding it as status quo where it is. But, you know, that's, like I said, I'm opinionated, and I always talk, and I shouldn't probably.
You're in good
And
company.
I will point out that the shoreline, it's now it's not the Comprehensive Shoreland Protection Act, it's the Shoreland Water Quality Protection
Right.
Act. Sort of bringing it back to its intention a little bit more. But that's an aside. So are we in agree, I mean, do we want to say continue to support the environmentally sensitive zone, period? I
I don't know that that needs to be an action. think if we're gonna review it, then it's an action, but if we're just gonna support it, then we wanna support all of our regulations.
You're here.
Could we,
Yeah.
could it be that we revisit the definition of the environmentally sensitive zone to make sure that it's fulfilling?
Yeah, or the intent to make sure it's fulfilling what, I mean, there's clearly still a lot of confusion in the community, a lot of time's gone by. For us to revisit it, seems like us doing our due diligence to check in. There may be a better tool, there may be something we could resolve so we don't continue to run into this conversation about, you know, certain words, but,
I don't want to be sneaky about language here, but I do feel like when we say environmentally sensitive zone, it's a trigger for a lot of
Right.
people. So what I want to think about is the intent of what we're trying to do, and is that to protect, you know, the larger streams and the wetlands and the floodplains that surround them. So can we investigate or, you know, revisit ordinances that protect our larger water bodies in the town or something like that, that's getting to the intent and not necessarily to the language that seems to be a trigger. But I don't want to be sneaky, so.
I think that's a great
it's
idea.
broader. I like that.
The idea of number 15 seems to, you know, when you have that and then you have these other overlays, which might serve the same purpose, you know, depending on how people feel about the ESZ as it stands today.
Right.
But that would also, I mean, I think that the smaller overlays might go a little bit further than the ESZ did as far as protections, because they're, you know, point specific.
So do we want to combine 14 and 15 into one?
Yeah.
And it says something like, investigate and support ordinances that protect wetlands and rivers and lakes or something. I'm not doing very well with the language here.
You did great a minute ago, but I
Yeah.
can't remember exactly what it was.
Well,
One shot at that.
you know, it's the type of thing, it might help if, instead of trying to come up with the exact language here, maybe you could, or we could all think about it,
Yeah.
email. I mean, I think we're on the same page, and maybe we can all take a stab at it, and,
Good call.
because I know I have a hard time, like, coming up with language like that sometimes on the spot, whereas if I could sit down and think about it a little bit.
Probably at the end of the day, those two will be combined.
Yep.
Is that it, Chris?
Well, I have one more thing, but it's way in the back, but along those same lines, just, is it, this may be worth discussing, because it's another, it could be another action plan that I don't think is in here, but, and if not, we'll just tell me to shut up, but, so the other thing that came up when we were talking about, and Greg, you know, clarify if I'm getting this a little bit wrong, but when we were talking about developing on Tenny Mountain, particularly on the river side of the highway, that we sort of encourage, if not require, new development to provide access to the river. You know, so it's not this barrier that totally blocks off people from, so that river is not like walled off and unusable.
Like a bike trail on the river.
Well, and ultimately, that's what, you know, we envision, some kind of bike trail alternate route that followed the river that, you know, people could move up and down that valley without having to ride on Tenny Mountain Highway or, you know, that type of thing. I mean, that was the ultimate goal, but it was sort of like the sidewalk. If we don't start putting in
Language.
sidewalks everywhere that we can sometimes connect, the ultimate development of that sidewalk system is going to be so onerous that we'll never do it. So if we do it, you know, a little bit at a time, and it was sort of, I think, the same idea with this, creating access to that river and sort of a usable riverfront.
It's like a multi-use trail corridor.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And I mean, that to me seems like that would benefit business too, because it would, sort of create traffic, benign traffic through there, and, they'd have this other alternate way of people to get there, their employees, there'd be many reasons, so. I don't know if that could be an action step somewhere, or, can we add those? I don't know.
So number 10 in section, is it infrastructure? It's the recreation goal. It's on page 43. It says, encourage and when appropriate require developments to set aside land for the provision of the recreation needs of future residents of all ages. Does it fit in there, including river access? Or,
And maybe including river access might be a nice addition to that, and that would take care of.
And I think planning a multi-use trail fits in with our intent, one of our action items to create a trails plan townwide. And that one should be included as one of our trail initiatives.
So yeah, we can add that phrase in 10, set aside land, including river access. Is there anything else on that kind of topic? You wanna go into the implementation stage?
You going?
No, I was thinking about sidewalks along Tenny Mountain Highway. I've actually walked down Tenny Mountain Highway to pick up my car at Wilson Tire,
It's a good time.
and it's like the hairs on the back of your neck are like,
Right.
like, geez, I hope I don't get smacked by a truck, even though the shoulder's pretty wide, but
Speeds are high.
Right,
Yeah.
and people are not really, it's hard to get in and out of places, and people are anxious about it, and I ride my bike to get other places there, so I don't have to drive somewhere, and it's a little sketchy.
let's fix it.
Anecdotal, but I see people from the hotel, walking there with their coffee in the morning.
Ooh,
Just going for a walk.
Yeah.
you see 'em-
That's
Beautiful parkland behind them, why don't they walk out there?
they're not crossing the road, are they?
Yeah, they go to CVS.
Well, some of them, yeah.
Yeah,
See, I assume that's going to happen. I mean,
We
obviously.
told the developer, that's why we wanted
Yeah,
sidewalks.
Yeah, you see a CVS right there, you're going to walk to it.
Right.
Of course, that was taken off the table when they put the liquor store in.
so any other board comments before Greg starts going through his checklist?
Can I just make one more quick, on page 48. I think it's, and maybe I'm misreading something, but number 1, implementation, the airport, should that just be implement or implementation of?
I've spotted that before.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
implement that airport master plan, and it has recommendations in it, so that's what it's
Right.
going for.
Okay.
Crap, since we're on the same page, so
I-
5 to 14 there,
Yeah.
way ahead of me, huh? Don't let it happen again.
I got a couple of those.
Uh-oh.
Number 7 on housing, which I didn't put down the page number. (32), number 7. And by continuing to prohibit, instead of by continue.
And while we're in housing, on page 32, let's see, make sure I get this. It says housing goal number 1. Are there other housing goals? Or is it just supposed to be housing goal?
Yeah, maybe
All
we
the others
started
just say
before.
goal.
Yeah. I think that might be a leftover from the last plan, the old plan.
Okay.
And so you're cleaning up all the formatting and stuff too? I mean, as far as like the space between like the number and the paragraph and stuff, I mean.
Oh, yeah, well,
It's like 1, 2, and 3 on that page are all different.
mhm.
So,
or the bullets versus
That-
number, letters,
yeah,
and things like that.
I know where that came from. We'll be cleaning that up.
Any other board comments? Is this a point, Greg, where you want us to start editing for typos, or when you get to that point, maybe we can figure out a good way to maybe pass around one copy to edit, so.
Yeah, up to you. You just suggested,
I did, I asked and then I
editing
told
the.
you.
Yeah, we'll clean it up and
Okay.
then, that'll be by, when we submit it, again, along with the land use and economic development, chapters to you. That'll be, mid-October, and then we'll have a chance to get more, typo feedback. But we'll try our best.
So November?
Yeah, which brings me to the checklist, mid-November for those, other chapters that are part of NCC's contract.
All right, your checklist.
Yeah, so comments on the transportation chapter, which was sent a week ago. If anybody has any now or later, I'll take them. But DOT, we submitted it to DOT at the same time we submitted it to you, and they just gave their comments today, which are pretty non-substantial.
Okay, that was my biggest comment. Like, what did they say?
Yeah, no, they weren't looking at any of the, recommendations and saying, no to them.
I reviewed it and I didn't have any specific comments. I think some of this could potentially, when we look at all the chapters together, some of this could potentially be in the appendix. And that's just the decision we're gonna have to make as we kind of format, like, how user-friendly and readable do we want this to be versus how much do we want just to be a resource document that you only use when you're looking for like traffic count information or bridge and culvert stuff. But a lot of what we talked to Tara about many months ago seemed to be reflected in here. So I didn't have any specific comments aside from that.
Yeah, we were playing around with the idea of including the maps in the text instead of at the end of the chapter. So, you were kind of getting to that with the appendix
Right.
part of it. If you guys have a strong feeling either way, just let me know and we'll format it that way.
I think it'll be helpful once we see, we're seeing bits and pieces, but once we see it all together in
Yeah.
context, I think it'll be a lot easier to see how everything will fit together, so.
I do have a thing on page 10 of the transportation profile. Boulder Point Drive is a town road, it's classified there.
Okay, yeah, and I have a feeling that there's gonna be some other things that I'll have to get your input or highway department's input on, or town administration, when it comes to the data on these maps. I'll
Okay.
get in touch with you over
Not a problem.
email. But yeah, especially with the paved versus unpaved, we get that data from the state's GIS repository,
Okay.
and they get it from the town, and the towns, including Plymouth, it seems, don't update changes to surface type of
Correct.
roads that well. They do a good job usually of updating ownership of roads,
Exactly.
except for Boulder Point. That wasn't reflected in the data source we had.
Right, that's okay.
Yeah.
Just- As with a lot of these things, sometimes things just jump out at you,
Right.
shows up in many places. Separate day.
It's very specific, like
Okay. Right, okay.
Are we good on this chapter?
We're good, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
sorry.
No, I just want to make sure everyone got a chance to. I think it'll be easier for me to read it now. I have a paper copy too, so I will. We can read these at home too if you come up with anything. Shoot you an email. Is that how you want?
Yep. And yeah, however you want to do it, go through Brian or just directly. So, land use chapter, we are making that priority because we want Plymouth Conservation Commission's input on the recommendations in there. So we're gonna have a draft ready by November 14th. That'll give them a week to review it before their November 21st meeting, and we'll send it to the planning board at the same time as we send it to Plymouth Conservation Commission, but just, keep in mind that we might then revise it again based on their feedback.
Just a question, have we created a future land use map for that chapter, or will
Future
we?
land use.
Yeah,
We're creating a revised,
future
or-
land use map?
no, a current one.
So no map that shows how we hope to guide change using the master plan. Typically, there's a future land use map that says, the village will remain, and if there are changes maybe to the way we want to zone things out by Tenny Mountain Highway, it would show that without lots of specifics. It would be more like a bubble diagram type thing. I just didn't know if that was within the contract or if that's something we have to do.
You guys have copies of the contract?
Not on me.
Got at least a couple.
I mean, for many people, it's the visual of where things are going in the
Right.
master plan. To not have it, it seems like we'd be missing something.
Yeah, because in that chapter, we were gonna, we've already made recommendations for the planning board to implement about future land use.
Right.
So we're gonna put it into narrative form, should also put it into map form.
Yeah, I just
agree.
didn't know
And
if that was on your.
if it's general enough, then that's something that we could just do.
Okay.
I don't even have to, look at the contract for that.
I mean, we could start at that next meeting, if we looked at the old future land use map, maybe make revisions or think about doing it totally different, if that's what the board wants, but.
So, yeah, we'll look at the recommendations, make that map, bring it to Plymouth Conservation Commission, and to you at the next meeting, and let both parties draw on it and revise it from there. Economic development, economic profile, chapter in volume 2. We'll have a draft of that ready sooner. We've already been working on that, so that'll be ready in time for the November work session with the planning board for the board to review and comment. The vision chapter, that is lower priority for us than land use and economic, just in terms of getting it done time-wise. So we're looking at mid-November for that, so probably not in time for the early November work session. And then all of the chapters that NCC wasn't contracted to update, we talked again at the last work session about, how to get those updated. We've got population, housing, historic resources, community facilities and services, education, and then arts and recreation. So it's kind of on the board to think about that.
Piece of cake.
And so that brings back a topic that came up last month when we met, or last time we met when you weren't here, and we didn't want to go too far, and it wasn't fair to Greg we kind of put them on the spot and asked like to what degree they're going to format the chapters that they have, or they can give us the Word documents so that when we write these other chapters, we can format it all so it fits as one cohesive document. So we kind of talked about it. We kind of flagged it as an issue. They're trying to be done, of course, by the end of December. Their contract wraps. And we're going to need time to do this. So I just didn't want to put undue pressure on North Country Council to do something that we're going to redo or revisit, because we're the ones that have to pull this final thing together and hold the public hearing and adopt. And we need time to circulate it to the other boards and committees and to the public so that when we adopt it, you know, people have had a chance to comment and make changes. So, just raise that again.
Yeah. I just lost my train of thought. So what we could do in terms of finalizing and formatting the project is just, the plan is just keep those chapters from the old plan in there as placeholders, and just do everything else as if, you know, it's finished, even if those chapters are not. And, you know, give it to you as a Word document, and you go through those chapters, and theoretically all that it would, you know, screw up is the page numbering.
So I guess part of what you're saying too is like if they're going to spend all this time polishing something that they were then going to rip apart and then put in a different format. So I guess we do need to figure out sooner rather than later how polished we need to get it from North Country Council. So.
And what our end product is that we want to put out there. If what Greg can give us is the Word document that's been formatted, as soon as we start messing with it, we're going to mess up everything that he's done. But so we have to be willing to fix whatever we've done. And if we end up with a bigger document that's not as user-friendly, we could put our time into creating a summary document that summarizes the plan. We just did one for the town of Newbury. It's 10 pages, and it's half sheet, so you can staple the middle. It's graphically nice, but it exists mostly as a digital document. And for most people, that's all they ever want to know about the master plan. You know, what's the vision? What are you going to do? Maybe that's not what we want. Maybe I don't know what we want, but we could look at a few other examples and see what you guys think is most useful.
Do you send around that digital document just so you can take a peek and just see, or any? And
I can give you I have a Dropbox file that has like maybe 7 or 8 different layouts of different master plans.
That would be great, just to see what else exists.
Yeah, and there were different motivations for the different designs based on what the town was doing, but I will send that around.
Yeah, so we're not going to get to the formatting part until at least, you know, at the earliest mid-November when we've got the other chapters done. So we don't need to know from you yet, you know, what you're thinking. But, you know, just keep in mind the 3 administrative options, which are NCC, you know, does another contract extension so that we can finish that item, do the formatting for you after December 31st. Or, you know, NCC does enough formatting before December 31st to, you know, fulfill the contract, but then that's what we're talking about. You know, would then undo and redo some of our formatting, or, you know, the third option is drop it from the contract, which I don't, you know, have the authority to do right here.
You wouldn't ask me to.
So those are the 3 options. Just think about it.
It sounds like at this point we don't quite know what we want. So I think if we see some other examples of other master plans, maybe we can all take a peek at those and just get an idea of what we would like to see, just some things we like, some things we don't like for the next work session in early November. Does that work?
Yep.
That's it for my checklist.
That was a short checklist.
He's that good.
It's a whole page, but there are a lot of sub items on
You
there.
spared us a lot of the details. While we think about, I can keep jumping on this formatting thing. While we think about the formatting, because we've talked about it a few times, we haven't always talked about it with you guys, and we haven't come up with an approach. But I know, like Chris, you said you'd spend time like actually going through and editing and wordsmithing, you know, especially with the sections we still have to write. You know, I think there's something to be said for Greg taking us as far as he can in this contract and fulfilling what he's going to do with the chapters he has. And then us, as we take it over, I think we're gonna find we take a lot more ownership. And it's not as passive, like, let's wait till North Country Council shows up again. And so I think if long as we felt like the workload was something we were on board with, or we have other people who are willing to help, and we could put that together and keep ourselves on a timeline, I think it could be really good.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree too.
And I can spend a lot of time, so, I'm willing to definitely volunteer for that.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm pretty adept at formatting as well, but kind of
mine,
goes in
Bill.
my territory, so.
All right.
That should be like the final step anyway. I mean, once
Yeah,
the
once
additions
the
and
content's
subtractions
done.
are in,
Yeah.
well, it'll be in a rough form, but, it'll be kind of, pagination will be screwed up, and the headings will be screwed up, and the bullets won't match. But at least as a complete document, once it's done at that point.
Yeah.
Then we can put it in a PDF on the website too, which will be exciting.
Yes.
So many
Instead of a Word
possibilities.
We haven't
document.
talked about fonts.
Oh, that time is coming.
That's the next checklist.
Okay, no papyrus, no Comic Sans.
No papyrus, absolutely.
Cool.
All right, thank you, Greg.
Yeah, thank you.
Next up, an administrative question about work session versus public hearing scheduling.
Yes. I had an applicant for next month's public hearing, boundary line adjustment. Called today saying that she was going to come to the meeting tonight. And I said, no, it's not tonight. It's scheduled for the 16th. And evidently there's a closing involved. Probably somebody's going to be out of a house if it doesn't happen first. I offered to put it before the board and see what they want to do. In this case, there's enough time to utilize the next work session, which is the 2nd, I believe, of next month, for public hearings, and also have the already scheduled public hearing for the 16th. There's room in the rules of procedure for the chair to alter how we do these, rescheduling these. The question is, how do you feel about it? And I'm going to try and not to weigh in at all. Those are the bare bones that I have.
Does the item that was supposed to be on the 16th care if it's on the 2nd or?
The other one?
Yeah.
No, my plan was to go ahead with both.
No, I know that, but does the one that's already scheduled or going to be scheduled for the 16th, are they going to be ready on the 2nd or?
I'm not sure I understand the
You're
question.
going to move the one from the 16th to the 2nd?
They will be, because there's enough time to do all the paperwork is done for both of them.
Okay.
So it's just a matter of the statutory deadlines, and there is time to get it in. So, take that off the table. We can get both the newspaper advertising and the abutters noticing out in a timely fashion. So, again, without any spin, what do you think?
So my opinion, I mean, I like rules, but but if we're meeting, I feel like there's no good reason to say, no, we can't do this, especially if it sounds like there's a lot at stake here.
It doesn't preclude the regular work session afterwards.
Right.
So it seems to me like we would be excessively officious by saying no to something like that. So that's my opinion.
I would agree that being flexible is better.
So we're going to bag the 16th meeting then, or?
You have a second work session.
Unfortunately,
Yeah,
no.
Right.
The 16th will still be a public hearing session, but again, these are both boundary line adjustments, so they're pretty quick.
Yeah.
The question was asked of me today by the surveyor, why aren't you doing this? Why does it actually go before the board? And I looked through all our documents, and I can't find why. And I started to go into the RSAs until I ran out of time. But, we lump minor subdivision and boundary line adjustment into the same thing when they're actually two different things, if you think about it. One is just equal land swap between two non-contentious parties, and the other is breaking out a brand new parcel from existing parcels. So, you know, the scrutiny is there for, you know, that as well. Probably more so for subdivision, because we have to look at lot yields and things of that nature. Whereas with the boundary line adjustment, and you brought this up in the past, Madam Chair, that, you know, you accept my vetting for these applications most of the time. So, I mean, what substantively is different between something which could be an administrative decision with the same oversight? I'm not asking for this, I'm just kind of putting it out there, versus bringing it before the board. And you know, it seems to me that we're seeing a lot of boundary line adjustments now, and that's probably just because the real estate market is heating up. That may go away, you know, next 6 months. We don't know. But, you know, I was wondering if what you guys' feelings were on, you know, how this could be done. If we're doing customer service, then, you know, is it a disservice to the customer to require a full board and a vote for basically an administrative task?
What are some problems that occur with boundary line adjustments? Like what?
Mostly it's in the mapping. You know, oh, we need, you know, you didn't do the lot yields correctly, or, you know, the bearing is off, it should be, you know, to the north, or, you know, things of that nature. Not because generally it's like you and me, you know, swapping around the rock wall that I hate and you like, or, you know, to add some other, you know, make that, you know, two abutting parcels, one that has, you know, like, sorry, I'm losing it now. Current use, you know, if I had a 10-acre parcel and I could get another 1.5 acres for my curtilage from my neighbor, that would enable me to put those 10 acres in current use. Whereas now I'm not, I'm just under the threshold for it once you subtract all the other things. You know, those are the types of things that happen with boundary line adjustments, or it's a privacy issue. You know, the nice standard trees. That way I'll control it and never cut it, you know, versus leaving it up to the other guy. And, you know, like I said, they're generally, everybody's getting something from that. And there's really no takings involved, nor, you know, the creation of a new lot, which, you know, you have to verify, you know, the frontage is correct, and, you know, that the road is of class 5 nature, and that the acreage is there to break it out. Because you can't create a non-conforming lot via subdivision. So that's just the way it is. But it's something to think about. I mean, if you guys want to streamline this, or even think that there's a need to, but it occurs to me that when you see a lot of the same applications in any short period of time, there's something funny going on. And I think it's absolutely what's happening in the real world. But, you know, if it can cut your guys' labor at all, you know, it might be something for you to consider.
I think it flags a bigger issue between major and minor subdivisions, because I've always seen planning boards deal with lot line adjustments as minor subdivisions,
Right.
and they're kind of a pain for everybody. But sometimes something gets realized in the review, you know, and can be flagged for everyone's awareness. But generally, they're administratively pretty straightforward, and you could probably flag that in your review. The way we define these things is ridiculous, I think. A major subdivision means any subdivision which is not a minor subdivision.
Right.
How helpful is that? And we went through, sorry, thanks for letting me borrow that.
Sure.
So we went through that. So if we wanted to revisit the subdivision regs and maybe clarify whether or not, and I don't really care either way, whether a lot line adjustment stays as a subdivision or becomes administratively done, if we can do that. But differentiating between what is truly minor, what is administrative, and a major subdivision like we had with the hotel and McDonald's. You know, one of the things we argued for was to have a plan for the overall subdivision of the property, and we really didn't have anything to stand on in our existing regulations. So I don't know if it's another master plan. I know in the master plan, we talk about revisiting site plan and subdivision regs to various degrees, but maybe we can be really clear about lot line adjustment.
Yeah, I mean,
Major
you know, and
subdivision.
certainly it's nothing that needs to occur tonight or in
Right.
the foreseeable future. I mean, let's put this baby to bed first before we tackle other things. But I just wanted to put it out there. So just to be on the safe side, could we have a vote about the meeting rescheduling?
Yes. Would anyone like to make a motion on, we're gonna have a public hearing on both the 16th and the 2nd, from what I
Correct.
understand, so we will be having a public hearing on November 2nd. So can we have a motion that, for that?
So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
At least the minor subdivision isn't defined by anything that's not a major subdivision.
It should be, though.
Yes, I mean,
think we oughta-
let's be
we oughta change
consistent.
it.
Just run in circles forever, right?
Okay, so looks like there's no new business unless anyone has any new business. There's no unfinished and other business. Any public comments?
On this boundary line adjustment, since I was involved in one to my benefit, but one of the things is the unintended consequences of boundary line adjustments is there's two types of restrictions placed on land: private restrictions and public. This body is the public restriction. And if you have granted a condition to a subdivision based on a profile of land that requires it to do something, or usually drainage, and someone comes before you with an innocent-looking boundary line adjustment, you need to review to see if in fact public and private restrictions that are either in the deed or in a registered plot plan aren't being undone. And this was a case of the event that happened up on Thurlow Street with people well-intentioned trying to facilitate and assist. But in the process of trying to do that, they actually were opposed and went against the public restrictions on the previous subdivision. So it's just an idea of reviewing that process of when you're doing a boundary line adjustment, which looks like an innocent action, but all property actions to be legal, lawful, and valid are in a deed and or registered plot plan that's been approved by this body. So it's just a long process. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
I can kind of go sideways on that one, if I may. Unless it's exactly worded like the zoning ordinance, the town has no authority over anything deed related. So, you know, it has, I always get approached about, you know, my homeowners association or the neighborhood association needs this, and it's like, yeah, my book says that doesn't exist. Sorry, you're on your own. You know, that's it. So yeah, there is, you know, certain things like Frank was talking about. I agree, absolutely, and maybe that's the root reason to keep them at the board level versus an administrative level. But I mean, you can unofficially support these land use controls in private hands, but you know, if the town is pretty well must stay hands off on all that, because suddenly you're voiding that line of civic versus private property and all the responsibilities. So, but it did raise a good point in that I mean, there may be things not necessarily recorded in the deed, but you know, in the memories of the people selling it, you know, or how things worked, or the drainage, or you know, little components that, you know, yeah, this BLA would work just fine, except the drainage easement is only a handshake between the two partners, which might go away in the future, you know. So maybe it is better to keep throwing stuff at the wall and see what sticks, rather than just, you know, do it by check boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that I feel that it's not taking on, it wouldn't be absolving us of a lot of work. They're not a lot of work to do those boundary line adjustments. I guess my only concern is it a real headache could we eliminate a headache for the people that are applying for them? But if we caught something that helped them out, because we sat around as a group, that might be worth, so, I don't know.
Yeah, I'd hate to think that somebody would be assuming that they're gonna take on this additional acreage or they're shifting this additional acreage, which means that they can do something now that maybe they really can't, or they really shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And I mean, the level of documentation you need is basically what we need anyway.
Absolutely.
So they're not getting off any easier as far as
You know,
showing their work.
When it comes to future uses, the applicants don't even have to tell you why. If they meet all the guidelines for it.
Right.
And I don't even know that we can ask them why, because it's a private concern. As long as it's legal, we have no real interest in the nuts and bolts of it there. But like I said, future considerations, you are the planning board. So
Frank, nothing on major or minor subdivisions? I figured you'd know that, okay.
I was trying to keep the time short.
He's always so considerate.
Any other comments from the board this evening? Before we adjourn, I just want to sort of summarize what we've promised and agreed to before the next meeting. So Steve, you're going to send around some examples of master plans.
Yes.
Greg's going to get us some draft chapters, which he'll send, I imagine, get sent to Brian. And those will occur at different time. Brian, would you mind, I don't have a printer and it's much easier for me to read these things on paper. Would you mind printing out a few copies?
Okay, Madam Chair.
I would, one for me, please.
Yes,
And,
absolutely. Anybody I kind of send it out electronically when I get it. And when it comes time for the meeting, I print everybody a copy, and then usually there's at least one member who says, no, I got my own. But if you would find it easier that way, I can get them to you in paper copies, everybody, or just sign up for distribution.
Is it basically going to be
like
this?
That. Yeah.
Or will it have changed substantially from this?
You're doing it anyway. It's just a matter of when you do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, paper would be easier for me.
Okay.
I'll send them both, electronic and paper, because it's easier to mass mail a paper or an electronic document.
And to get the land use chapter to the PCC, should I just forward it on the electronic copy on to everybody? Is that easiest?
Should I just email you and Brian at the same time when the land use chapter is done?
If you're cool with that, Brian.
Sure. Don't yell at me if I send you another copy and a paper copy too, though.
Have you solved the image issue?
I just have stopped and until I have time to figure it out.
Okay, so as we look through some of the other examples of master plans, and if anyone else has others, please share those. But think about some things you like and would like to see and how we package and present this thing we've been working on for, 2 years now?
Long time.
Yeah. So, with that, would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I would love to do that. So moved. Is that my job?
It's nice to have you
My
back.
responsibility.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
He had his hands tied last time because he was sharing. Couldn't do it.
Chris, do you want this back? Your 2000